Hello and welcome. I am Felina Silver, President of the League of Women Voters of Brookline. The League is a nonpartisan organization that does not support or oppose candidates or political parties. Our goal tonight is to provide voters with clear, balanced information to better understand different perspectives on the proposed override. We've structured this forum to ensure fairness. All speakers will be asked the same core questions. Time limits will be enforced equally. Our focus is on the information, trade offs, and impacts, not advocacy. We ask all present to remain respectful. I would like to introduce Chaz Carey, who has so kindly agreed to give us an overview about why this override is being thought of at this time. Chaz?
Thank you, Felina. And thank you to the League for inviting me and for having this forum. The work that the League does is really critical in terms of educating the community and making sure that everyone can make informed decisions one way or the other about this ballot question and many other things that are going on in the community. So I really want to thank the League and thank both the participants here from the yes and no ballot campaigns. It's just great to see this level of in-depth discussion in the community about something that has a significant impact on the community going forward. Um, in Massachusetts, since the early 1980s, we have been governed under a ballot initiative that was passed and then adopted as statewide legislation that's commonly known as Proposition 2.5. And what Proposition 2.5 says is that property taxes in municipalities cannot go up by more than 2.5% year over year, except where we find something called new growth. For example, say someone puts a swimming pool in their backyard, the value of their property goes up. Okay, that can be added to the tax levy. The value of that can be added to the tax levy. So it's 2.5% plus any new growth that the community might encounter. The exceptions to this are only allowed if the voters consent to them. And there are two different types of exceptions, a temporary exception and a permanent exception. A temporary exception is usually for some sort of capital project, like a new building. Those are typically financed by debt, and so they're called debt exclusions. So for a period of time, say 25, 30 years, community will issue bonds and pay for those bonds directly with taxpayer dollars. That's how a debt exclusion works. So taxes go up, but they go up for a set period of time. And then once that condition is satisfied, taxes go back down. The other thing is a permanent change to the tax levy, a permanent increase across the board. And that is known as an override because you are overriding the limit of Proposition 2.5. That allows municipalities to raise property taxes by a set amount and only with the consent of the voters. It takes a majority vote to pass an override, and the communities can schedule overrides as they see fit. And some communities have regular override cycles. Communities such as Arlington is probably the most prominent example. Some communities have never had an override, either because they don't believe that their voters would accept them, they don't believe they can afford them, or for whatever reason. Brookline in the past has had 5 overrides in 1995, sorry, 1994, 2008, 2015, 2018, and 2023. All of those overrides passed. And so this would be our 6th override, which is on the ballot on the May 5th election. That amount, the amount that is on the ballot, when you read your ballot question, you have to see how much money is there, how much the tax levy on the whole is going up. That number is approximately $23.25 million, of which 5.31 would be going to municipal departments, and the remainder would be going to the school department. So all other municipal departments share 5.31 million, and the remainder is going to the schools. Brookline does something somewhat unique with its overrides, which is while it asks for that amount, the ability to raise the overall amount that can be taxed by that amount, it typically phases that in over time. So it does not happen all at once. In year one, there will be a certain step up. In year two, an additional step up. And in year three, an additional step up. Um, all told, those steps will increase the tax levy, but they will increase, the tax levy will also be increasing in the of no override. So I want people to understand that a vote for no override is not a vote for taxes not going up. Taxes will still go up by the apportioned 2.5% plus any new growth plus the amount of debt that we still carry, right? We are still carrying a fairly significant amount of excluded debt, although we anticipate that that share of debt as a portion of our budget will start to go down beginning in FY29 and FY30. So around the turn of the decade, we will start to see a transition away from debt as a overall portion of your tax bill. So those are the basics of an override question. A yes vote will allow taxes to go up, and for the commitments that have been outlined by both the schools and the town. The town and schools have marketed this as a continuity of service override. The idea being that if there are new programs or new things being done, it is in the service of providing the level of service that is currently provided. And a no vote would not increase the tax levy. And in those situations, the schools and town have outlined proposed steps that they would take in order to balance the budget. Municipalities must balance their budgets in Massachusetts. We cannot deficit spend. And so we would need to take whatever steps would be necessary to balance our budget. I will always say those proposals are just that, proposals. Ultimately, a budget must be ratified by town meeting, which it does at the annual town meeting, which usually follows local elections. But the proposals that are being put forward by staff in the event of a yes and a no scenario do represent our best reasoned proposals for how to address each scenario, whether an override passes or does not pass. And we understand that there are concerns there. People may say, well, can you cut this and not that? Can we spend one-time funds to bridge gaps, et cetera? I do think it's worth noting that both the superintendent, Bella Wong, and I have had long discussions about these issues, and the cuts that we would recommend represent our professional judgment on what would be the best option for the town going forward in the event that the voters decide either to approve a tax increase or not. And so I just think that's an important factor to take into consideration. And certainly, ultimately, it is the decision of town meeting as to what budget is ultimately passed. I'll leave it there. I think that's a pretty good overview of the process. And I will just say, again, this is a great opportunity to get information. This is a great opportunity to make your mind up. However you decide, whatever you decide, I do think it's really important that you get out and vote. It's great to have a level of civic participation in this community. Local government is really where the rubber meets the road, right? Most people's experience with government is with local government. Are my potholes being filled? If I call the police, who answers? If I call the fire department, who answers? And how you express your views on local government is through local elections. And so we really value your input and your feedback, and we follow your direction. So voting is really important. So I hope you all are out there making informed decisions, and whichever way you decide to vote, I hope you will exercise that right on or before May 5th. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Chaz, for your in-depth overview. Glad that you could be with us this evening.
And I apologize for having to run off, but I actually have to go help a select board meeting out. So best of luck to all of you, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Take care.
I would like to continue moving forward, and we will alternate each time we go through allowing things to be fair. So we will start with the yes side to give an opening statement of 2 minutes. So Mariah.
Thank you. Hello, my name's Mariah Nobrega, and I'm a proud Brookline lifelong resident and current member of Brookline School Committee. It's a pleasure to be here with you today to inform you why voting yes on question 1 is so important. You may be thinking, I don't want my taxes to go up find savings elsewhere. The town and schools have found savings and will continue to do so, but your yes vote is still needed, and I will explain why. First off, Brookline is not alone in this challenge. The Massachusetts Municipal Association calls the current financial situation a perfect storm, with many communities struggling because of unusually high increases to things like healthcare premiums, which are going up by 11% next year alone in Brookline, and utilities by 10%. With increases like that, the typical non-override revenue increases of 3.5% or so simply don't keep up. The town and schools have already scrutinized their budgets to eliminate all expenses they can. Superintendent Wong has already cut over 22 full-time positions from the schools for next year, and Town Administrator Carey has also reduced police, fire, and DPW hiring. And town and school leadership are further committed to finding solutions that minimize the need for future overrides. They are looking at things like energy management strategies to reduce utility costs, but complex issues won't be solved by July 1st. So we are not alone. The funds will support lean budgets, and staff are exploring longer-term cost containment strategies. These are all positives. What happens if you vote no? Some people have said, oh, they'll bring back a lower amount soon. Public budgeting doesn't work like that. World language and music in grades 6 through 8 will be gone for at least next year. And once the teachers are gone, bringing programs back becomes even more expensive. This is just one of the impacts of next year's cuts. The cuts in the following years would increase class size averages by more than 50%, from around 20 kids in a class to over 30. And then, of course, there are the town cuts to public safety and senior services, which are extremely concerning. In a fire, every minute counts. So please vote yes. The incremental expense maintains Brookline as the place you chose to live in. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Elizabeth, your opening statement.
Thank you, Felina. I'm Elizabeth Childs of Keep Brookline Affordable. This override at $23.25 million, the largest in the history of Massachusetts, is too expensive. If passed, property taxes will go up by 18% over the next 3 years, on top of the 93% increase since 2015, resulting in a total 130% increase by 2029. This override is not affordable and hits seniors and neighbors on middle and fixed incomes the hardest. Our taxes are the highest in Massachusetts as a percentage of median household income. 50% of senior renters are housing burdened, spending more than 30% of their income on housing. The same for 47% of younger renters and 26% of homeowners. Overall, 39% of Brookline households are housing burdened. This override offers no solutions to Brookline's budget problem of spending more each year than it raises in revenues. It continues business as usual, offers no guardrails, no commitment to change. The town threatens catastrophe if it does not pass. But this is not true. Thanks to you, the good people of Brookline, we have choices of how to solve this budget problem. You have stepped up time and again to pass overrides and debt exclusions to fund our great town. Town revenues have grown by $51 million, 18% in the past 3 years, massively expanding the tax base. You have funded 3 beautiful new schools, and your generous tax dollars have built robust reserves to the tune of $70 million, more than 15% of revenues. Town and schools' lack of transparency is egregious. The study committee reports they were not given the formal school budget until 48 hours before their final report to the select board and could not evaluate, question, or analyze the school budget. Is it too much to ask how the money will be spent before we write the check? Let's look out for those among us who are truly burdened by this override. There is no crisis. Vote no on question 1 to keep Brookline affordable.
Thank you. Now moving on to our questions, starting with you, Elizabeth, this time. What problem are you trying to address, and why is this the right time to address it?
The problem is the town and school's ability to fund high-quality education and town services within reasonably reliable revenues. In the past 3 years, the town's property tax revenues have grown from $281 to $332 million, or 18%. This is more than double 2.5% per year. Town and school services have not received all that money because of Brookline's large debt service, now more than $600 million, primarily due to school buildings. This debt service is a constraint on how much more the taxpayers of Brookline can afford to increase their property taxes. But we don't get to start with a blank slate. Each household has to figure in all its costs. That's why it is disingenuous for the town calculator to ignore the other base property taxes that Brookline residents pay, and that with an operating override, which is a permanent increase to the base tax levy, all other tax increases will start at this higher number and compound over time. The time to address it is now. Simply plugging spending beyond revenues with another override kicks the can down the road and makes the problem bigger, rather than solving it, as we did with the 2023 override that was only half what this ask is for. The sooner our town and school leaders put forth realistic solutions, the more choices they have to solve the problem of how to deliver high-quality town and school services on budget. We hire really talented managers. We can expect that they have the chops to manage within the budget. There is a gritty mathematical truth that only with a fiscal constraint do you achieve optimal services. We, the voters, must set this constraint, a limit, if you will, to assist our town and school management to make the most of every precious public dollar for the best services possible.
Now, same question for you, Mariah. What problem are you trying to address, and why is this the right time to address it?
Thank you, Felina. The problem that we are facing is that Brookline, like many cities and towns across Massachusetts and beyond, faces a structural deficit. Non-discretionary expenses like those I mentioned earlier, health insurance, utility costs, are growing at over 10% this year alone, faster than town revenues can grow without an override. Unless we pass this override this May, Brookline will have to cut significant services across our public schools and several other parts of town services. That would mean no music and world language for middle schoolers. It would mean shutting down a fire company and laying off firefighters. It would mean elimination of the senior center transportation. There is no magic belt tightening solution here, as such as alluded to. Now, why now? The town has to have a balanced budget enacted by July 1st. Unlike the federal government, Brookline cannot deficit spend. So to have that budget in place, town meeting, which votes the budget in late May, as the town administrator just mentioned, needs to know what our tax revenues will be. The outcome of the override vote on May 5th will allow the town and schools to maintain services, or will require them to cut them. To maintain the Brookline we know and love, we need to vote yes. This is not to say that we should not also seek to optimize how we spend our funds. And the Expenditures and Revenue Study Committee, of which I was a non-voting member, identified many opportunities of where to make longer-term structural changes. For example, looking at energy demand management strategies, as I mentioned earlier, or how to adjust the share of health insurance premiums that the town pays. But these are problems that have been decades in the making and cannot be solved by July 1st. A no vote kills the momentum we are building to focus on these issues. We need to vote yes now and look for ways to make overrides smaller and further apart. Thank you.
Continuing on with you, Mariah, what principles or priorities are guiding your position?
The many, many people who are supporting the operating override are committed to the principle that public services are a priority, that public education, public safety, public health, libraries, senior services, public works, and other local government services are important to a functioning society and worth paying for. Every single person in our community benefits from these services, both directly and indirectly. It's also a core principle that Brookline is an amazing value to live in, even after question 1 passes. We often hear about how Brookline has the second highest tax bills in the state. That's true only for single-family homes, which are just 1 in 5 residences. And even for single-family homes, that fact is distorted by the value of the very highest end of homes that are worth many, many millions of dollars. When you look at all residences, up to those worth many millions of dollars, Brookline is actually among the lowest of our peer communities, except for Cambridge. You can see more information about relative tax bills in the frequently asked questions section of the yesbrookline.com website. I trust town staff who have stretched town revenue so effectively while maintaining Brookline as a community that is top ranked within the state and nationally. And I know they are conscientious stewards of these funds. And this is what the priorities and the principles that are guiding me and the Yes campaign and our many supporters. Thank you.
Thank you. And for you, Elizabeth, what principles or priorities are guiding your position?
Principle number 1 is keep Brookline affordable. Brookline is the amazing community it is because of its people. We love our town, and we want the people who made it to be able to start and finish their lives here, build their families and businesses, and participate in this vibrant and diverse community that they have built. We don't want them to be priced out of Brookline. The study committee data and analysis is clear and compelling. We are on an unsustainable course when it comes to affordability. We are pushing out middle-income families, seniors, and making it impossible for young adults to build their lives in Brookline. We want our teachers and police and fire personnel to be able to be our neighbors. Principle number 2, keep Brookline accountable. Brookline residents have stepped up repeatedly to fund town services, including building robust reserves, new schools, and renovated fire stations. They deserve honest, thoughtful planning by town leaders, not coercive threats that our middle school children will no longer receive music if we don't pass yet another override, or that we will not have adequate public fire response. I would ask the yes side to join me in never again using public safety as a threat to pass an override. Public safety should be treated like debt service is treated in our town budget, a given that serves us all. It should be above the line in the budget. And principle number 3, there is a special obligation of town leaders for prudent stewardship of public dollars. We should expect a commitment to finding efficiencies and serious proposals to the community about how to deliver high-quality education and excellent town services within the real constraints of the revenues that Brookline can realistically afford.
Thank you. Continuing on with you, Elizabeth, what are the short-term and long-term financial implications of your approach?
Well, in the short term, there will be an 11% increase in property taxes without this override, which the voters have already agreed to shoulder. The school committee is in negotiations now with the teachers union, so some structural reforms could be immediately possible, such as the proportion of health insurance premiums that the town pays. We pay 83% for premium health plans in Brookline. They could also negotiate sustainable salary increases and adjust the repayment of circuit breaker funds that the school committee used to close a budget gap last year, so that the whole $2 million repayment is not budgeted to be repaid in this next budget year, but could be spread out in later years. This alone would cut the projected $4.4 million deficit by 40%, and it doesn't hurt a single student or require any layoffs. In the long term, it is exciting to explore all of these avenues that the Excellent Study Committee identified as ways for us to continue to deliver excellent education and high-quality town services within revenues that Brookline can reliably raise each year. This is not a catastrophe. This is an opportunity to make our schools and our town services even better. Balancing quality and cost is the bread and butter of responsible public management. There are 2 very good outcomes. 1, improve quality while maintaining cost. And 2, maintain quality while decreasing cost. There are 2 poor outcomes. Maintain quality while increasing cost. This is the override. And of course, the worst outcome is to decrease quality while increasing cost. This is an opportunity for the Select Board and School Committee to fully vet with the community how we are spending public dollars and the value we get for them. When the school budget consumes 60% of our total town revenues, this budget in particular is critical to openly discuss in detail with Brookline residents. In this override, this was the budget that the study committee did not have time to evaluate, question, or analyze before submitting their final report to the Select Board, which urged the Select Board to give the voters a choice and make changes in how we spend taxpayer money because the current course that Brookline is on is unsustainable.
Thank you. And for you, Mariah, same question. What are the short and long-term financial implications of your approach?
So in the short term, the options for Brookline are limited and stark. We either pass the override to maintain our current levels of town and school services, or we don't, and services will have to be cut, including eliminating around 15% of the school staff, which is 130 classroom teachers and many more staff, 20 firefighters and beyond. And if we pass the override, our property taxes will go up around 7% higher than they otherwise would, or about 18% total over the next 3 years. And if we don't pass the override, we have a tax increase of 11% anyway, with a drastic reduction in the services that make Brookline a safe, healthy, educated community. In the long term, we need to keep exploring other ways to keep costs in check and generate revenues. Passing the override gives us time to keep working on these longer term solutions. Town Administrator Carey and Superintendent Wong are committed to their roles in this work, and they have drafted an MOU to continue to explore the things I've mentioned earlier, such as health insurance premiums, which require collective negotiations with all unions representing both town and school employees. And I just want to highlight here and rebut one of the things that was just said. That is not a short-term strategy that we can pull out of the hat and make happen for July 1st. These are collective negotiations with all unions in the town through a public employee committee. It is not a short-term project, although again, the superintendent and town administrator have publicly committed to negotiating in good faith with our unions. Another long-term strategy is to earnestly commit to commercial development. For too long, Brookline has kicked the can down the road on seriously pursuing commercial development. There are a few exceptions, such as 2 Brookline Place, near where both I and Elizabeth live, which alone brings in nearly $2 million in tax revenue each year. The Chestnut Hill West project is estimated to bring in over $5 million in annual tax revenue, should that be passed by town meeting. These are game changers for the long term, and we need to find more of these types of projects that are win-win for the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Staying with you, Mariah, what impacts do you expect on town services and on different groups in the community?
Every resident stands to lose if the override fails. On the town side, there would be tremendous public safety impacts, as I've mentioned, the fire department likely closing a company. There would be up to 20 firefighters laid off by fiscal year 28, which means that response times will get worse in case of an emergency. And I just want to highlight that the fire department is largely our first responder for medical emergencies, and so this impacts our most vulnerable populations. The other thing that I want to mention again, the Senior Center Medical Transit Program. On the school side, we would have to lay off 210 full-time equivalent positions over 3 years. This impacts the livelihoods of people who have taught children, our Brookline children for many years. The impact of this would be on every student and family. Grade 1 classroom aides cut in half, eliminating music conservatory in grades 4 through 8, ending middle school world languages, class size impacts, as I've said. All K through 8 after school activities would be eliminated or fee-based, which really limits access to our lower income students. And sadly, many people who can afford it may choose to send their kids to private school in this situation. We've heard this comment. The result is that kids of families who cannot afford private school will end up in a decimated school system with class sizes of over 30 students, diminished ability of teachers to be able to do their work and teach and educate students, and limited capacity to provide support to kids who need it, no matter what kind of support they need. This is not the public education that Brookline is renowned for, or that we as a community who deeply values education want to be known for. Further, while sometimes people in town feel that schools are just an issue for parents, the quality in our schools impacts the desirability of this town overall and property values. Look at the difference between property values on either side of the Brookline-Boston line. The difference is not due to location, it's due to school attendance. And that is still to say nothing of our broader societal interest in strong public schools to educate the next generations who perform important jobs for our society, including taking care of us all as we age. Prior generations in Brookline have carried this legacy forward, and it's our turn to do so now. Thank you.
Thank you. Elizabeth, same question for you. What impacts do you expect on town services and on different groups in the community?
If this override does not pass, there will be no immediate impact on town services. The select board and school committee will go back to the superintendent and town administrator and request viable plans to resolve the gap in the budget. If there is a community critical need, all those reserves that your taxpayer dollars have built over the past decade could be used as a bridge until savings from changes are realized. And the school budget in particular can be fully and openly discussed and understood with the community so that a reasonable path forward can be plotted and our students can continue to receive excellent education we can afford. For the taxpayers of Brookline, it is a different matter. Even without this override, they will shoulder an 11% increase in their property taxes over the next 3 years. The Greater Boston Standard Lease allows this increase to be fully and immediately transferred to increased rents, so renters will also be impacted. If this harmful and misguided override does pass, many middle-income folks and seniors will have to make painful choices to continue to afford to live in Brookline. Young families will make decisions about whether to keep renting here with increased rents or move to a more affordable community to bring up their families. These are people that are not coming back to Brookline. And we scratch our heads why school enrollment is down nearly 1,000 since pre-COVID and is at best flatline, if not slightly decreasing. Commercial landlords will be impacted as well, threatening the viability of businesses. In FY25, Brookline already suffered a net loss of 14 commercial properties. Increasing property taxes will only exacerbate this exodus, along with ordinary residents having less money available to spend at Brookline businesses because they are spending more on property taxes and rents. This is not a cycle of growth. This is a cycle of gradual flight and decay.
Thank you. Staying with you, Elizabeth. What trade-offs does your position involve, and how should residents think about them?
Not passing this override protects the residents of Brookline, taxpayers, homeowners, renters, and commercial property owners and lessees, businesses who operate the businesses in Brookline to thrive and build their lives or their business here. The proponents of the override protect the town to continue business as usual and transfer taxpayer dollars into unsustainable town and school operations. You have heard it said that in 3 years it will be easier for the town because our past pension liabilities will be caught up. We are fixing the mistakes of prior town leadership. These are always choices. There are always choices when it comes to budgets. The town could choose to pay off these obligations more slowly, just like the schools could choose to pay off the circuit breaker loan they took last year more slowly. Bundling all these costs into 1 or 3 years in the budget is a choice. Not touching stabilization funds to secure the fire department is a choice. Eliminating middle school conservancy is a choice. And continuing to pay 83% of premiums for Cadillac health plans is a choice that does have to be negotiated. The town and schools have made choices that they have put forth as givens. But if they are honest with us, they are choices. The schools built their budget assuming a 5% increase in teachers' salaries every year. They assume a constant number of employees with no improvement in efficiencies to decrease their total number of personnel over the next 3 years. The town assumes less new growth over the next 3 years than has been on our trend for the past decade, which lowballs projected town revenues. These are choices that are opaque to most voters, but should be transparent when asking for a check for $23.25 million. Brookline residents must make choices every day about how they are going to manage their money to balance their debt, their home condo repairs, their housing costs, health care, and they still get their households to run with care and concern for each other. We should expect the town and schools to do the same. Not threaten us with unsafe homes if there is a fire or with a degraded middle school education. There are always choices to be made in the budget. We can and should expect that the town and school are transparent with these choices. They have not been, starting with giving no choice to the voters in the amount of this override request.
Thank you. Same question for you, Mariah. What trade-offs do your position involve, and how should residents think about them?
Thanks. Before I address some of this, I want to just respond to some of the things that were just said. The No campaign has shared messages such as the one you just heard about paying down the 1.9 million. The idea is that if there's some easy tweaks and the schools could avoid major cuts next year with some small adjustments, like just deferring or delaying returning the $1.9 million from the special education fund that PSB staff and school committee used to close the gap for this year. This frankly demonstrates a complete lack of understanding about the PSB budget. The funds that are being referred to, that are being requested in the override, provide recurring year in, year out revenue to match recurring expenses, whereas that money was a 1-year plug for these recurring expenses. So this 1.9 million cannot be deferred or spread out. Those are real expenses for the upcoming year and future years. So there is a real lack of understanding. Furthermore, the idea of spending down reserves or of less conservatively estimating revenues that were just proposed, These are trade-offs that, frankly, I am quite surprised that the chair of the Brookline Republican Town Committee is proposing because they're not financially responsible, and we should all be really keeping to responsible decisions that are going to preserve the quality of life that we have. Now, going back to trade-offs. The trade-offs is that homeowners are going to need to pay more in taxes to retain level services across town and schools. Your tax bill will increase by 7% at the end of the 3 years due to the override, in addition to the other standard increases and prior exclusions that total 11%. Brookline is a diverse community, and this incremental amount may be difficult for some Brookline residents. I don't want to ignore that fact. However, the alternative is truly catastrophic for many or even all residents, as I've mentioned before, with impacts not only to education, but public safety and more. I would just point out these impacts were not the Yes campaign that decided. These were our lauded town staff that we all agree are doing an excellent job and are high quality among the best, who have made the decisions that, as Town Administrator Carey mentioned earlier, were the right decisions for the town. They are the ones who have articulated what the cuts would be, not the Yes campaign. So there are tax programs that the town offers to support seniors and low-income residents. They are enabled through state legislation, so they're not perfect, but they can help. And there's more information that's available through the town's finance department or on the town website. And furthermore, I'll just end by saying in exchange for the 7%, residents will be able to maintain town and school services. This override was described by Town Administrator Carey as a Corolla, not a Cadillac, by which he meant that there's no fancy new things being added. This is the continued provision of existing well-run programs, and that is what you were receiving as your trade-off. Thank you.
Thank you. Continuing on with you, Mariah, what alternatives did you consider and why did you decide against them?
I'm going to answer this question a little bit differently because there's not one person who gets to make decisions and decide against them or for them, but I'll sort of give a broader overarching answer to this. Both the town and the school staff present detailed multi-year budget forecasts to help the select board and the school committee, of which I am one member, consider the options. And those budget forecasts and budgets are available online for anyone who's interested in seeing them. Both town and schools made significant cuts to minimize their override requests. Again, a huge part of the challenge that they're facing is things like health insurance premiums and utilities that are taking up most of the new revenue, which means that the budgets for the town and schools to provide services are flat, if not declining. If you compare this to 3 years ago, the override in 2023, that situation was completely different. In 2023, the projection for the 3-year increase, just through the natural increase in the town revenue, for PSB was $10 million over those 3 years. This year, because again of these health insurance increases and other challenges we have to revenues, the increase for the schools is just 1.8 million over 3 years. It goes up by 2.5 million in the first year, and then it actually goes down in year 2, and then down again in year 3. The same thing is true with the town. Small increase in year 1, reductions in year 2 and 3. So neither town nor schools is even getting the 2.5% increase. This is a completely different financial situation. It makes the choices even more painful. And I think that this reality is what the select board understood when they chose to put one option on the ballot. They saw that every stone had been turned, that every reasonable alternative had been considered, and that even a small amount less than the requested budget would have significant negative impacts to services. Expenditures and revenues recommended putting multiple funding levels on the ballot. And I completely understand the rationale for this, but I think that the select board understood that tiers only make sense when there is a lower cost option that makes sense. And they saw that there really wasn't one. So the alternatives we have to choose from are yes or no. And given that, I recommend voting yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Same question for you, Elizabeth. What alternatives did you consider and why did you decide against them?
Well, in considering whether to pass this override, I asked myself, is this override good for the people of Brookline? And my answer was no. The day after the vote, there will be no impact on services. The money will not have been spent until 2027. Plenty of time to find an acceptable pathway to close the budget gap that the schools are predicting, but that has not been evaluated, questioned, or analyzed by the study committee. We have immediately in front of us an opportunity to negotiate fair and affordable contracts with our teachers and make structural changes in the large costs of health insurance. We have town leadership with strong management chops who can creatively make changes to deliver high quality services within budget. And we have the most generous taxpayers anywhere who have willingly voted to pay the highest property taxes in Massachusetts for excellent schools and town services, who have funded robust reserves to get us through a difficult crunch. Yes, on the override can't have it both ways. Is this a blip and a crisis? If so, why not use some reserves? Or is this the plan to budget by override after override rather than make the necessary but difficult decisions to right size our town and school services to live within a sustainable budget? And most importantly, passing the override harms the people of Brookline. People who I have come to treasure as good and generous, who openly welcomed a gal from an Ohio farm and kept an eye on her young family and struggling business, who say hello leaning across the fence, who invite her in for coffee and a chat, who share with her all the joy of a diverse, highly educated, cohesive community with neighborhoods and parks and independent shops where people know you. These are the people of all ages that this override threatens, because they are already housing burdened by choosing this great town. Adding to their burden is absolutely wrong in my worldview, and we need to find a way for the schools in the town to live within a 3.5% increase every year. We have increased taxes significantly more than that every year, and it is time for us to retool and right size our services.
Thank you. Staying with you, Elizabeth, the next question is, how should success be measured if your approach is adopted?
Success would be if the town revenues continue to flow in and expenses are rationalized to continue to deliver high quality school and town services within budget. We have a great success story to tell. We have a terrific town. We have new schools. We have highly respected public safety, and we have funded robust reserves for a rainy day. Cutting a fire station sure sounds to me like a rainy day. All you have to do to see our success is to look at the chart of the fund balance to see its exponential growth since FY 2022, to realize that the taxpayers are funding Brookline generously. Success will also be measured when our town leaders present to the community a sustainable plan for improved efficiencies in town and school services so that we can move forward without lurching from override to override and threatening the good people of Brookline with catastrophe if they don't give more money. As I explained before, the best success is either maintaining quality while decreasing cost, which requires improved efficiency, or improving quality while maintaining cost, which requires the policy and programmatic expertise that Brookline so values.
Thank you. Same question for you, Mariah. How should success be measured if your approach is adopted?
Thank you, Felina. Passing the override allows us to keep Brookline's educational, public safety, senior, and other services stable and recognizable, avoiding drastic and haphazard cuts to the services and associated jobs. So success looks like Brookline government continuing to serve its residents while also continuing to make progress on longer-term solutions to our structural deficit problem. Rejecting the override, on the other hand, means fewer class offerings in our schools, larger class sizes, lengthened emergency response time. It makes Brookline unrecognizable. Success can also be quantified in our bond rating, which at AAA is the highest rating possible. This is an important financial tool and indicator of strong financial management, and it's in part derived from community support for funding needs and from the property tax base, which will be negatively impacted with the reduction in services, should there be a reduction in services. Success can also be measured by exploration and hopefully adoption of some of the key expenditure and revenue study committee recommendations, which themselves should support making overrides smaller and less frequent. So there are absolutely qualitative and quantitative measures of success that we will be able to look at should we support the override. Thank you.
Thank you. Staying with you, Mariah, what risks or uncertainties should voters be aware of?
Thanks. So there is always uncertainty when you're doing any sort of planning, financial or otherwise, especially in the current geopolitical climate, domestic, international. For public schools, things like the closure of the U.S. Department of Education at the federal level, which has threatened to reduce or eliminate some of our federal funding, which supports programs for mandated programs for low-income students and students who are learning English, for example. So there's a lot of different challenging things that go into this type of complex long-term budgeting. With that said, voters should hear my recurring refrain that town and school staff and elected officials are committed to long-term planning that will help align expenses and revenues. There are also legitimate risks associated with not passing the override. For example, the staffing reductions at the high school are so drastic. There's an estimated 29% reduction in class sections. There is actually a risk the high school will no longer comply with state regulations offering full student schedules. There's a risk with having to offer science classes of over 30 kids when the science labs are built for 24 students. So there are multiple risks here. And of course, the risks of delayed public safety. As we all know, in a fire, every minute counts. And again, our firefighters are playing double duty as first responders. So voting no is a tremendous risk. Voting no is like supporting DOGE, slashing services and jobs up front, hoping we can find a way to pick up the pieces later. That's not a plan. It's truly a fantasy, and it's a risky fantasy at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to you, Elizabeth. What risks or uncertainties should voters be aware of?
Well, the first thing I would say is I don't think we have to worry about our bond rating. Bond ratings are based on multiple factors, but most principally a massive tax base, which we have in Brookline, and reserves, which we have robustly. And frankly, Marblehead hasn't passed overrides in, 20 years, and they have a AAA bond rating. It's not passing the override or not passing the override that will determine our bond rating. It's multiple factors. And even if we lost our AAA bond rating, it doesn't impact our past borrowing. It impacts future borrowing, and to the tune of about 0.25 basis points, which is a very small amount of money on any borrowing going forward. And we've already borrowed over 600 million. So I think the likelihood of us borrowing a lot more is not so high. So I think that's probably not really a true risk. But as they say, past performance does not guarantee future results. So if none of these changes work to actually improve right-sized town and school services, the town can come back and ask for an override. But don't we need to try first to see if we can get this fixed correctly now? We are not in a cash crunch. We can leverage this opportunity to make very positive change. We are a resilient community. We're motivated. We're capable. This will only be a crisis if we make it so. There is no appetite to close a fire station by anyone who has any authority to make that decision. We can have enough faith in ourselves to have this community conversation to get our public spending in line with the revenues that we can raise as taxpayers without pushing our seniors and our middle income and our fixed income folks out of Brookline because they can't afford to live here anymore. We can do this. And I don't think we need to be so afraid that there's going to be some crisis because we don't have a cash crunch, even though I know everybody would like to see more money in the schools in the town, but the taxpayers are the ones footing the bill, and we have to look out for them. We want them to stay here.
Thank you. Staying with you, Elizabeth, what do you see as the strongest argument on the other side, and how do you respond to it?
I think the strongest argument is closing a fire station. And the response to that is that we have an $18 million stabilization fund to keep it open. And I think if we don't use our rainy day funds when we need our rainy day funds, why in the world are we collecting all of these taxpayer dollars and putting them into reserve funds? I mean, if this is a crisis, we should treat it like a crisis. If this is business as usual, override after override, that's how we're going to balance our budget, then let's just say that. But I think we can't have it both ways.
Thank you. Mariah, same question for you. What do you see as the strongest argument on the other side, and how do you respond to it?
I think the strongest argument is probably that the tax increase may be difficult for some residents. And I understand that, and I believe that it is true for some residents, although I also think that it's overstated when the no side claims it's 18% and the true override amount is 7% over the 3 years. The town has multiple tax deferral and other relief programs that are available to seniors, low-income folks, veterans, and disabled residents who meet the program eligibility requirements set by state law. And I also think it's important that, we talk about renters. And it's possible that there will be effects on rent, but that really does depend on the specific landlord, the lease, et cetera. Many landlords are already charging what the market will bear. So there is limited, if any, ability to tax on increases. Um, and for landlords who are not charging the market rate, the entire tax increase on the apartment is still in reality going to be a pretty small fraction of just 1 month's current rent, hundreds of dollars a year compared to rents, which are thousands of dollars per month. So I think it's important to acknowledge those things but also to contextualize them and make clear how great they are of an impact to the Brookline residents and how great and how the value that is gotten from that in exchange for the yes vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Staying with you, Mariah. If your preferred outcome does not occur, what should the town do next?
So the town and schools will have to make the very painful cuts that they have presented publicly over the past 3+ months, really going back since December, to achieve the balanced budget that is required by law. So this will include for the schools laying off an additional 60 full-time equivalent positions. That's next year alone, on top of the 20+ that were already cut. And as I mentioned earlier, some people have said, oh, they'll bring back a lower amount soon. It just does not work like that. In the schools, contractually, staff have to be notified by early May whether or not they will have a job next year. So they will be pink slipped. They will find new jobs. World language and music in middle school will be gone for at least next year. And we will lose those educators and have to start again from scratch if and when we have funding restored. The first grade classroom aides who support our youngest students, half of them will be eliminated. These are frontline classroom staff who support early child literacy, and that's just the first year impacts. So next year will be a loss for PSB if there is a no vote. I believe that the select board would need to come back and decide if they want to put another question on the ballot later this year, and that may be enough to help the town, depending on the timing and how their contracts on that side are structured. But the schools, which operate on a very specific annual calendar, will be severely negatively impacted. And so and we don't know, the select board may decline to act later this year. So possibly the next year, we just don't know. And in the meantime, the town's reputation as a wonderful place to live, to work will suffer for really good reason as our services decline. So we really need to vote yes to ensure that this does not occur. Thank you.
Thank you, Mariah. And to you, Elizabeth, if your preferred outcome does not occur, what should the town do next?
The town should still look at all the excellent recommendations in the study committee report and act on them. And in particular, it should go back and ask the study committee to take the opportunity, which it did not have before their report, to evaluate, question, and analyze the school budget. And I believe that if the override does pass, I think that the other thing that should be done is to really look at the abatement programs for people. The abatement programs are budgeted in the town budget for $30,000. It's almost nothing. And there's no really, I think they're difficult to access. I think they're tiny. They're only a few $100s for many people, and it doesn't really help a lot. So I think that the town would have to really consider what it would mean for people to be making choices to not move to Brookline, to leave Brookline, and would be on the hook to do what they could. But again, that's another budget expense. So something that they would have to factor in.
Thank you. I'd like to say thank you to both speakers. We've heard different perspectives on the proposed override and its potential impacts. We'll now move on to questions submitted by the community, which have been reviewed for clarity and neutrality and will be directed to both sides. So I'd first like to ask, and starting with you, Elizabeth, can you explain the factors that have contributed to the current school budget situation in Brookline, including how the reported deficit has changed over time? who is involved in developing and overseeing the school budget, and how does the process work, if you are aware?
Sure. So I think there are really 5 things that have contributed greatly to the problems with the budgets in the schools. And the first one is the budget has used one-time money for operational budgets, ongoing operations. And this began with COVID money and it has continued on, and it has to stop. That's not good fiscal discipline. And I certainly was criticized for thinking about using rainy day funds, but money is fungible. And if you borrow from the circuit breaker and you can't pay it all back, there's more money in the circuit breaker. The circuit breaker balance is not low. But we need to stop using one-time spending for operations like we did with the circuit breaker last year. That's why we've got that on the books this year, is trying to pay that back. The other thing is our salary structures. We really have to look at realistic salary structures and how we increase our salaries over time to hold on to great teachers. We know that they work very hard. We want to make sure we pay them well, but the salaries have to be sustainable. And that's all part of the negotiations that are going on now. So actually, we should have some really good information if we would delay and not do anything about this override now, not pass it. We would actually have the results of those negotiations to help us understand what needs to be done. Healthcare premiums need to also change. The town contributes 83% to healthcare premiums, even for high-end plans. Many municipalities do not do that much. In fact, the study committee outlined how our healthcare premium contribution is way out of line with comparable communities, and that needs to change both in the schools and on the town side. Also, our new buildings and the staffing required to maintain them and to operate them is high. We have large buildings. They require multiple levels of administration. And I think looking at administrative costs and administrative bloat is critical. And then finally, our special education costs are very high. And we do spend approximately $4 million every year for special education costs for students who are not Brookline residents. And we should be negotiating very aggressively to get that money from those sending districts. I think it's very important for us to negotiate to get those monies back.
Thank you. Mariah, same question for you. Can you explain the factors that have contributed to the current school budget situation in Brookline, including how the reported deficit has changed over time? Who is involved in developing and overseeing the school budget, and how does that process work?
So as the outgoing finance chair on the school committee, I have a front row lens to this whole thing, and I'm going to give a very factual process. It might be helpful even if I run a little bit over time for your audience, Felina, who will be interested, I think, in how the process works. So budgeting for the schools is complex. It starts in August, just after the fiscal year begins for the next fiscal year. Typically, there's an initial forecast that's multi-year presented in December, a more refined forecast in January, and then a detailed budget for the next year is presented in February. The school committee considers the budget from February until it reaches consensus on the expenses, and town meeting votes the allocation in May. The budget changes over time as the details are refined, but ultimately both the expenses and the allocation must align. For example, between December and January, the enrollment projections for the following year show where we need to remove or add classes and then the associated staff for that. Additionally, the town puts out an initial estimate of how much it will allocate to PSB in December, but that is also refined over time given new information about insurance costs from the state aid, and other revenue inputs. So both the expenses and the allocation can vary up and down. A lot of changes. Last year, there was a headline about an $8 million gap, which people interpreted as missing funds or a deficit. Neither was the case, and ultimately, PSB made a series of decisions about expenses, and ultimately, the expenses aligned with the allocation that town meeting voted. So as you've heard, there are many people involved in the process: town staff who calculate the allocation, school staff who present the budget, school committee who approves the budget, town meeting which approves the allocation, and of course, at the state level, the legislators and other state officials who approve the state budget. The state is the staff in the insurance commission at the state, which decides health insurance costs. One of the things that's also important to remember is that education includes many mandated services, and that is another complexity to the overall budget. So there are so many moving parts. It's really important to understand that this is quite complex. and that there are many people involved working collaboratively to bring the budget into alignment with the allocation. Thank you.
Thank you. Staying with you. Can you explain why Brookline for Everyone supports the proposed override and how you see it affecting both homeowners and renters?
Sure. There are numerous groups that are supporting yes. Brookline for Everyone is one, and they are joined by Brookline PACS, Climate Action Brookline, Brookline Parents Organization, Progressive Brookline, even the Charles River Chamber of Commerce, which represents Brookline business, is also a supporter. So I'm not a member of these groups. I can't speak for any one of them, but one could infer that they see that the maintenance of existing town and school services and Brookline quality of life to be important and of value to their membership. In terms of effects on homeowners and renters, not passing the override will affect everyone in town due to the significant service and associated job cuts that would have to be made for this fiscal year that will start in July. So educators laid off, larger class sizes, firefighter layoffs, shuttered fire company, all of this would be impacts on everybody, homeowners and renters. Passing the override means that we keep all of these services we currently rely on, and property owners' tax bills go up by a bit more than they would have, 7% over the next 3 years. For the 51% or so of Brookline residents who rent their homes, as I mentioned, again, it is possible that there will be effects on the rent, but it really depends on the situation, whether or not they're already paying a market rate rent or not. And again, it depends thinking about the property taxes as the smaller percentage of their overall rent and the benefits that they accrue from the maintenance of services. Thank you.
Thank you. Same question for you, Elizabeth. Can you explain why Brookline for Everyone supports the proposed override and how you see it affecting both homeowners and renters?
I do not see how Brookline for Everyone supports the proposed override, because the proposed override is actually making Brookline much less affordable for homeowners and renters. The housing burden is clear. The study committee was very clear about this, how housing burdened our renters are. Senior renters are 50% housing burdened, and younger renters are 47% housing burdened. So the idea that increasing property taxes is going to make that any less is just, it doesn't compute. And actually, high property taxes gradually erode housing values over time, because when a person purchases a home, they consider the whole cost, which is all the price of the property, but also the tax burden and the insurance cost. And so as the taxes go up, this is another kind of gritty economic truth, that as the taxes go up, the actual housing value goes down. And that's a pretty serious problem. It won't happen tomorrow, but it is a serious problem for Brookline. And single family homeowners have absolutely carried the high burden of multiple overrides and debt exclusions in Brookline. And we cannot pretend that the previous overrides and debt exclusions don't significantly add to the tax burden. It's not just 7% increase. Actually, the first year is an 8% over what would have happened without the override. Without the override, it's only a 5.08% increase, but it's still an increase. And without the override, the taxpayers have already agreed to increase their taxes by 11% over 3 years. With this override, it would be 18%, which is what they did the last 3 years. The last 3 years, the tax levy increased by 18%. It's dramatic. So no, I cannot explain to you how Brookline for Everyone supports the proposed override.
Thank you. Staying with you, Elizabeth, for the final question, can you explain how the proposed override funding would be allocated between schools and other town service in Brookline, and what factors determine that allocation?
Well, town services are funded only in the first year. The schools' services are funded over 3 years. So the last 2 years, funding is only for the schools. And that's why the percentage increase is greater in the first year. But it's important to realize that more than 75% of this total override is to fund the schools. And that is particularly concerning, given that the study committee acknowledges in its report on page 38 that it only received the formal school budget 48 hours, 2 days before their final report was due, and that they did not have time to evaluate, question, or analyze the budget to make recommendations on both expense management and revenues, which was their charge. Their charge was slightly different from many prior override study committees, which were asked to simply recommend a number for the overrides. Their charge was to make recommendations both on expense management and revenues. So I think that the part of the determination of allocation is by requested need, but we don't really know because the school budget was relatively opaque to the study committee.
Thank you. Mariah, same question for you. Can you explain how the proposed override funding would be allocated between schools and the town services in Brookline, and what factors determine that allocation?
Sure. If the override passes, 5.3 million is allocated to the town and almost 18 allocated to the schools. This is based on the projected budget deficit for the town and the schools respectively. And if passed, the override would fully fund these deficits. Both town and school staff developed these numbers based on what they calculated as the minimum viable funding needed. For the schools, this still reflects a small reduction in service that you'll see, as I mentioned in the cuts, the positions that were described earlier that will happen no matter what, as well as on the town, also a cut in services. The town administrator, Carrie, has rightfully described the override again as a Corolla, not a Cadillac. And so there really is the minimal funding needed to be able to ensure quality services, but this is not a luxury. There are not new programs involved. This is to continue to run established programs here in Brookline, established services. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now will allow you, Mariah, to go first with giving your closing statement for this evening.
The choice between yes and no is clear. Do you want to continue to see high quality services for all residents? Do you value public education, public safety, public works? If you do, vote yes. There is no magic belt tightening solution here that lets you vote no and keep what you cherish about our public services. The No campaign has shared messages saying that with some easy tweaks, PSB can avoid major cuts next year, like the special education funds that we discussed earlier. Again, this demonstrates a complete lack of understanding about the PSB budget. Recurring revenue to match recurring expenses. I think Elizabeth and I agree that is the best way to approach this. It can't be deferred or spread out. Whether it's their misunderstanding about how recurring expenses occur or their proposal to further cut the central office staff, which has already been drastically reduced in recent years, almost 20 full-time positions in the past few years. Or whether it's changing the high school staffing model, which, by the way, just happens to be carefully designed to reduce costly special education interventions. The proposed solutions from No are just not viable. If something sounds too good to be true, it is. These solutions have been analyzed and found to be costly and detrimental to students. Passing the override means our property taxes would go up about 7% more than they otherwise would over the next 3 years. But even if we pass the override, the annual taxes on any Brookline home will still be lower than the annual taxes on a home of similar value in nearly all nearby communities. By voting yes on or before Tuesday, May 5th, you have the chance to affirm your commitment to Brookline students, Brookline seniors, and all Brookline residents. Please vote yes for yourself and your neighbors, for the Brookline we have and the Brookline we want to keep. No Cadillac, just the Corolla we know and love. Brookline is an amazing value for the taxes, among the lowest of peer communities, even with this vote. Thank you, and please vote yes.
Thank you, Mariah. And now with you, Elizabeth, please make your closing statement.
Thank you, Felina. We all want good schools and town services, but this override is too expensive and is not affordable for many of our neighbors. It is also not a solution to Brookline's budget problems, and it digs our hole deeper in funding unsustainable town and school services and programs. Additionally, the ask comes before the town and schools seriously proposing solutions to this budget gap. And the town and school have not been fully transparent about the need for or the plans for how to spend this $23.25 million. Threats are not serious proposals. And I have been the chair of the finance committee of the school committee, and I have served there. And I do know of what I speak. There are always choices, and these choices have not been presented. The study committee's excellent 642-page report outlines the expense. 18% increase in property taxes over the next 3 years, with this override on top of the past 93% increase in property taxes since 2015. The report outlines affordability. 39% of Brookline households, especially seniors, already are housing burdened, spending more than 30% of their income on housing, and that does not include condo or home maintenance. The study committee also said that this is not a solution, and they clearly stated that the path we are on is unsustainable and we must make major changes in order to continue to afford high quality services. They had excellent suggestions for closing the gap: healthcare premium share, sustainable salary increases, management of overtime, administrative bloat, to name a few, none of which have been committed to or proposed to lower the amount of this override. And finally, the lack of transparency, the lack of choice, and the lack of respect for the taxpayers is stunning. The study committee got the formal school budget 2 days before the final report and could not evaluate, question, or analyze that budget. And this accounts for $18 million of this override. The select board did not give the voters the choice of a tiered option as strongly recommended by the study committee. And there is no recognition by the town or the schools about the incredibly favorable position that we are in and that we do not have a cash crunch, thanks to you, the taxpayers of Brookline, who have stepped up time and again to generously support a massive increase in our tax base with 5 previous overrides. You have built 3 new beautiful schools, and you have built robust reserves over the past 10 years that have exponentially increased since 2022, so that we are prepared for whatever future we must face. Keep Affordable Brookline believes that it is time to say no on question 1, to compel the town and schools to go back and come forward with a serious plan to right-size our services with the revenues that Brookline residents can realistically afford to raise every year for this incredible town that we live in with its incredible people. So I urge you to vote no on this override and send the schools in town back to solve the problem of being out of step with what revenues we are able to raise in our town. Thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you. Thank you to our speakers for sharing their perspectives. We have heard a range of viewpoints on the proposed override and its potential impacts in Brookline. The League of Women Voters does not take a position on this issue. Our goal is to support informed voters. We encourage you to learn more and participate in the upcoming vote. Thank you for watching. This recording is being shared to help inform the community and may be viewed at any time. Thank you for taking the time to view this discussion.